I'm Rob Awahand. We're doing a video series called The Tools of Critical Thinking. In the first video, we talked about the fact critical thinking isn't just one thing. It's actually a set of different thinking techniques or approaches that you can use when you see a new message or an idea in order to think about it more carefully and decide whether you can trust it, whether it's a strong enough idea to change your mind or change your behavior. Now, we talked about what does quality thinking look like. We talked about theoretical frames, and we talked about the importance of logic and how there's always more logic to learn, but even a little logic knowledge can already be extremely useful in separating good, smart messages from bad ones. The next thing we're going to talk about here is fact-checking and verification. Now, logic is good and useful and important, but even perfect logic will reach the wrong conclusion if you are starting out with incorrect facts. Fact-checking and verifying whether something that somebody says is true actually is true is the next critical thinking skill we'll talk about today. Fact-checking is probably the fastest way to see if a writer deserves your trust. If somebody is giving you incorrect, inaccurate facts, don't trust them. Facts can, of course, be fabricated. Some people just make things up. They can be distorted. Sometimes somebody will give you facts that are true, but they'll tell you, here's what these facts mean, and they'll give you a meaning that doesn't fit with the actual facts. Okay? Sometimes facts can be cherry-picked. And cherry-picking is when you only mention the facts that agree with your original position, your original bias. And this is surprisingly easy to do. You've got to be a little more careful now that we are flooded with information, and you can find evidence to support any position out there on the internet somewhere. Another thing that can happen is people can take facts out of context. Facts appear connected with other facts, with other ideas. And when you separate a fact that somebody has found from the other facts that they found with it, when you separate a fact that somebody has found with the methods they used, the reasons they did that study, it becomes easier and easier to manipulate facts to say anything you want. So always watch for people who tell you where their facts are from, who gathered them, maybe what university they're working for, things like that, and how, what was their method. If somebody is telling you how and where they got their facts, you can trust them more than somebody who just suddenly, unexpectedly says, oh, 85% of people in this country agree with my position. Oh, well, how did you get that fact? Where did you ask the question? What was the question exactly that you asked? Because there are ways of asking questions that have biases. If somebody says 85% of Americans agree with me, I want to know how they got that fact, what questions they asked, how many people were in the survey, and where that survey was. Okay? Because all of those things will give me clues whether those facts are accurate or twisted. Trust somebody even more if they give you access to the facts that they're reporting on. Okay, if somebody says, you know, a 2015 study of 20,000 American university students reports that 60% believe something, that's good. But what's even better is, here's a link to the report that asked 20,000 university students a set of questions. You can read the questions, you can see the data, and then you can decide whether the person writing is reporting that data accurately. If they're giving you the opportunity to check for yourself, there's no hiding manipulation if I can check for myself. Now, I said that you can take a fact out of context. I want to give a simple example of that. Okay? Now, I'm living in South Korea, and Korea opened up to foreign workers not that long ago, really. So here's an example of what happens when you take facts out of their context. And these numbers are all made up, by the way. Okay, let's imagine 1989 was when the foreign workers program started bringing foreign workers into Korea. Let's imagine that in 1989, 20 foreigners were arrested. 20 foreigners got in trouble while they were living in Korea. Then in 2020, 2,000 foreigners living and working in Korea got arrested, got into trouble. Now, some people could look at those two numbers, 20 and 2,000, and say, whoa, no, foreign crime is 100 times higher than 1989. And maybe that'll get on the front page of the web portals and everybody's going to get upset about it. But let's add a little bit of context. And again, these numbers are all made up. This is just an example. In 1989, 2,000 foreigners lived in Korea. In 2020, 2 million foreigners lived in Korea. Instead of looking at that raw number, if you calculate the crime rate by dividing the number of crimes by the number of people, you see that the crime rate was 1% in 1989. 20 is a low number, but a higher percent of the total number of foreigners living in Korea. And in 2020, 2,000 out of 2 million is only a 0.1 crime rate. Okay, so even though the number went up, the rate went down. And just by adding these two numbers, 2,000 and 2 million, we see how you can take true facts and tell a totally different story. Sometimes the researcher's intentions are part of the context for facts they discovered. Why are they doing that study? Okay. Another thing to consider is that there are also times when disagreement from other experts is also part of the context. So consider that as well. The next critical thinking tool that I want to talk about is agenda setting and framing. Now, these are really important in the way media reports information. I want you to imagine a photographer. Okay, a photographer is trying to decide what news to report. So their first choice is, should I go to the protest? Should I go to the campaign event for the presidential candidate? Should I go to the museum opening? Or should I go to the refugee center where new refugees have arrived? Okay. By deciding which of those stories to report, we see agenda setting. Agenda setting is deciding which story is important and which story isn't. Okay, think about a newspaper editor who decides what goes on the first page of the newspaper and what goes in section D, what goes on page 1 and what goes on page 20. Okay, that is agenda setting. Just by putting something on page 1, they're telling us this is more important. Now, another thing that news agencies and media groups do, which is a little more subtle, is framing. Framing is telling us how we should feel about a story. So first, that photographer decides, should I go to the campaign event, the museum opening, or the refugee center? Then, after the reporter goes to the refugee center, they have to decide where to point their camera. What's important at that refugee center? They can point their camera at the two little boys who are fighting, or the little girls who are taking care of a baby. They can point their camera at the people who are dressed in traditional clothes from the country the refugees came from, or they can point their camera at the refugees who are wearing Western-style clothes. They can point their camera at somebody who's speaking English or somebody who's speaking the language of the country they came from. Or perhaps they can find a refugee who speaks Korean. Which one of those you put in front of the camera, which one you put on TV, influences whether people watching that news report feel like these refugees are ordinary humans who need some help, or scary foreigners who are not like us. Another example of framing is, imagine a news journal program asking the question, do vaccines work? When all of the science is on the side that, yes, vaccines work. Just by asking the question, do vaccines work? A news program is treating science as if it's equal with fake science. Because when you ask, do vaccines work? If I put somebody who thinks they work and somebody who thinks they don't on a stage together to debate, then it looks as if those are equally valid positions. But the person who says yes, they work has thousands of pages of research and reports supporting their view, and the person who thinks they don't work has a few YouTube videos he saw. Treating thousands of pages of academic research as equal to a few YouTube videos I saw is a unbalanced way of presenting a topic, and that's framing. Just by asking a different question, we've completely reframed this topic. Framing is very subtle. It's easy to miss the way just by choosing a headline, choosing a few word choices, or focusing on certain details instead of other details in the first paragraph of an article or the first minute of a report. Those things can really powerfully affect how people think about a topic. Okay? Think about something like the new welfare plan will cost something money, instead of the new welfare plan will help something number of people come out of poverty. Those two headlines totally change the frame of the topic. Watch also for both sides framing, especially in political reporting. Political reporters don't want to be accused of having a bias against one political party. But what happens sometimes is politicians see that even if I lie all the time, the news will still treat me as if I'm an equal candidate to the other guy who's actually trying to tell the truth. If one political party is always lying and don't care about lying, if you give that person equal balanced coverage with the person who's trying to tell the truth and trying to be accurate to the facts and to the science, is that fair? Okay, that actually puts the group who's trying to tell the truth at a disadvantage because they have to stay with the truth, but their opponent can say anything they want. And if the media doesn't punish them for lying and lying and lying, they're putting the truth at a disadvantage. And that's the danger of both sides framing. So watch for that. That is agenda setting and framing. It's a little tricky to start noticing it. Once you notice the frame, you can think about, do I accept this frame or not? So it's a very useful tool of critical thinking. Practice it, get used to it. Once you start noticing frames and agenda setting, you will notice them everywhere. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next video where we will talk about rhetorical techniques and watching for different viewpoints.